briefly to introduce you. You don't need lots of introduction, of course, because you are well known by ICVA members. But just to say that you have been in this role as Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator since February 2022. You come to this role with a very rich experience, including different positions in different regions, in development, in finance, and also, of course, this important role in the humanitarian sector. You came to this position in a very challenging time. I mean, since you came on board, the number of crises that we have to respond to has kept increasing. In a few minutes, there will be a principals meeting today, also looking at the Israel-Gaza situation. So, of course, very, very challenging period for all of us. And my first question to kickstart this discussion, I have prepared a few colleagues, if you allow me, just to start the discussion with Joyce, and then I will shut up and leave the floor to you to ask all the questions you would like to Joyce. But my first question to you, Joyce, if you allow me, is to see a bit what has remarked you, what has impressed you more during this 1 year and a half in this position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mireya. You can hear me? Yeah, I really first want to express my heartfelt thanks to Mireya and to your members for welcoming me, and of course, Ignacio, whom I met, for welcoming me with open arms, with warmth, but also with pragmatic candor. To this community of humanitarians. I was very new. I mean, what Mireya did not mention was that when I met her, I was very new. And one thing I've learned in my journey is the need to be humble, to listen to those who know more than you, who have the experiences, the networks, the insights, and what Mireya and Ignacio shared with me over a year ago. I always take it with me as a guiding principle, particularly engaging with partners, but also as a leader within the UN system. So I just wanted to say thank you. Yes, you're right, Mireya. You know, I joined OCHA just a couple of weeks before the Ukraine war. So you can imagine from then to now, given what has happened over the last few days, how the journey has been for me. I'm by nature an eternal optimist. I tend to look at the little hopes, even in the darkest moments of life, because I think it's very easy to switch to the negative. And for me, what has impressed me, especially being a newcomer in this community, are the following. One is the commitment, deep commitment and bravery of humanitarian workers, particularly those who are working at the front line. In my year and a half here, I have traveled to MENA, to Syria, Yemen, DRC, Niger, Colombia, on and on. And I always insist that when I travel, I must go to the communities. I must go sit down with IDP families. I am a mother of 2 young adults, and I want to know how are women, how are children, how are husbands, men struggling. So one is the commitment. I've met, including some members of your network, Mireya, who sacrifice everything to help others. So for me, that has been an absolute gift out of this job. I think the second is I have a deeper appreciation of the challenges that humanitarians face in delivering services to others. Issues around access. You know, when I was traveling from Sana to Hodeida on the road and seeing how even for me to move from point A to B, what it took to make sure that there are no landmines, there are no threats, and to think that this is the life of humanitarians day in and day out was just incredible. So the whole challenges, but the perseverance and determination of humanitarians to say, we are going to go ahead with our work is absolutely extraordinary. The third is, and I'm coming from development sector, Mireya, as you rightly pointed out, I spent 20 years at the World Bank Group and other places, UNEP, especially within development environment space. What has impressed me is how the donors are still investing in humanitarian action. You know, in other places, as gloomy as the picture may look, you know, we talk about $50 billion required for this year, but I know in other places, including in important sectors, we don't have the same kind of consistent donor support to the sector. So when I engage with the donors and see the excitement in them when they ask me, what can I do to help? That is not the norm in other places that I have worked. So the challenge with that is, how then do we use their resources effectively? And how do we support the beneficiaries so their taxpayers can say, aha, the $1, the money is actually making a difference. I think the fourth is the whole system. You know, somebody asked me, why did I move from UNEP working on environment to OCHA? I mean, it's a long story, but also what I've appreciated a lot about OCHA compared to UNEP is a whole system approach. You know, in UNEP, we are working mostly as part of the UN system. Here, through the ISC mechanism, every meeting, for example, the deputies group meeting that I chair, which Mireya represents ICVA, I see non-UN partners. When I travel, I see local, national NGOs, partners of the UN. And through that, believe it or not, you are making us, UN and others, as non-UN partners, actually better and more accountable. For example, you take the issue of accountability to affected people. This is your area. And I always say, how do we leverage the knowledge and expertise and experience of local national NGOs to help us become more accountable to affected people? So those are the things that in broad strokes have really impressed me over the last year and a half. Over to you.
Thank you, Joyce, and it's great as of a way you link to what you have seen during this period in the area of work with your career path so far, and also with your personal feelings. You reflected as a mother, as a wife as well, and your link to the communities. It's very important, and it speaks for sure to all the participants to this meeting. You described already some of the challenges that the sector faced today. Against this background, what do you see as the main priorities for OCHA?
Well, thank you. You know, it's a very good question. So let me say, what are the main priorities for OCHA, especially now that I've also worked with Martin as ERC, and him and I are sort of joined at the hip in terms of even setting the direction for OCHA. Let me try to summarize the priorities for OCHAs in the following ways. One is, broadly speaking, advocacy. The world has become much, much more complex, much more complicated, much more competitive. So the need to advocate for example, for access for humanitarian workers to go through and do their job across the globe, it has become more of a constant in our priority, whether it's Myanmar, whether it's DRC, and it ranges from bureaucratic issues, visas, other things, safety, security for humanitarians and humanitarian partners, to bigger things in terms of space. For example, this recent crisis in Gaza, yesterday I spent 70% of my day in meetings together with the whole system, trying to figure out how can access across Rafah, crossing with Egypt, could actually be negotiated to be open so emergency supplies, people can be moved. So access in real-time conflict, but also in prolonged conflict. Access in, for example, in countries that are anti-humanitarians. We are seeing a lot of attacks on humanitarians, frontline workers. Just earlier this week, I gave a Security Council briefing on what happened in Ukraine on Thursday, where 52 people were murdered, including children. So that space takes a lot of energy in terms of negotiating access. Two is advocacy around money. And this also is linked to competition. I mean, the crises are coming and they're coming fast, and there's so many. The old, the new, natural disasters driven crisis we've seen in Libya, in Morocco, Pakistan, Turkey, but also conflict. We are seeing what has happened over the last few days. So if you look at the donors, and the amount of resources have gone up, but the donors have pretty much remained the same. So how do we bring in new donors to support an expanded set of crises? How do we work with development partners in prolonged crisis so they can provide basic services, etc.? So advocacy around money. And then under advocacy, I would also put partnerships. How do we work? We cannot achieve the localization AAP if we are not working with local and national NGOs. But how do we have meaningful partnerships with partners, including building and sometimes rebuilding trust, depending on context? That's another one. I think the second bucket thematic is around accountability to affected people, around the localization, around putting people at the center of our action. And here, you know, the flagship initiative that the Emergency Relief Coordinator has started. And as part of that, also looking at how can we lighten the HPC load and the planning and the preparation, because we realize smaller partners like NGOs don't have the kind of resources that big partners have. So the whole thematic areas, GBV protection. Yesterday, again, I was attending a meeting on DRC on looking at gender-based violence and the scale down of MONUSCO and the impact that may have on humanitarian work. So the whole set of thematics is another. And then lastly is efficiencies. Just looking within OCHA, are we actually putting the resources where the needs are the most? And that means, for example, looking every country and seeing, do we need to go subnational? Do we need to look at positions that could be converted into national staff, etc.? And that is taking a lot of time. I call it the plumbing part of running OCHA. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you again, Joyce. And these are priorities not only for OCHA for sure, but for all of us, for the entire sector. And I'm sure colleagues in the meeting will come back to you with some follow-up questions on issues such as access, protection, of course, funding and funding crisis and competition regarding funding. So we'll have an opportunity to elaborate further on these priorities. I would also like to ask you about, you mentioned the partnerships with NGOs. That's very important in addressing the current challenges and also within OCHA priorities. How do you see concretely this partnership between OCHA and NGOs at the current situation? And where do you think we have the potential to do better and more together?
Okay, so Mireya, I'm glad you asked that question. I mean, to be very, very honest, the partnership with NGOs is absolutely at the core of not just OCHA, but also the whole humanitarian system functioning. Let me give you a very specific example because we are all in this now. Yesterday, I was asked by my bosses here, what is the humanitarian response in Gaza? And who is doing what in terms of humanitarians? And when I was digging deep, it was about the Gaza Red Crescent that is there trying to move bodies to help people and a very difficult, very, very difficult. So one, the NGOs are a core part of us being able to deliver services to humanity, to be very honest. I sometimes feel through my travel that when everybody leaves, people who are on the ground are the local and the national NGOs. I've seen it in Sudan, I've seen it in other places, etc. So they're a co-partner of the whole system. I think too, because you are very close to the communities as well, you have a sense of the pulse of what works, what does not work, and how we can be better in our engagement with the community. So when you think about the accountability to affected population, we can benefit from you on what that means. What have you seen, for example, through your network as good practices? I remember one national NGOs in one country that I traveled say to me, I asked him for advice, and he said, one thing we can do better is true listening to communities, not listening with biases. And that type of feedback is very relevant for the whole system because that you are there with the communities, you know, and you are seeing all sides to this equation. I think the other is the localization agenda. For the localization agenda to succeed, we need our NGO partners. In the fragmented world that we are living in now, I feel the NGOs are the constant that holds all of us together on the ground. You also empower us to mobilize more resources in different crises because of the trust also the donors have in NGOs. You are absolutely core part. And then lastly, I would say the issue of trust. Mireya, you know, we discussed this in the last deputies group meeting. Trust between communities and humanitarians, trust amongst ourselves, trust between international and national NGOs, local partners. Again, that's an area where you have a lot of wealth of experience and expertise that you could bring to bear. Martin and I, in the flagship initiative, we're looking also how the NGOs can help advise on what does the lightening of the HPC cycle look like. So again, helping the whole humanitarian response planning and response to be more efficient could benefit from NGOs. And I think having NGOs sit in humanitarian country teams. I've engaged with some of them. There's a bit of variation. In some we have more, some we have less. We're not where we should be. And then also at the global level, for example, in the deputies group, the ISC mechanism is extremely, extremely helpful. Over to you.
Thank you again, Joyce, and I'm sure colleagues again will follow up with some of the elements that you provided on your answer. You mentioned different times speaking about OCHA's engagement, you referred to Martin and yourself. And of course, you have very complementary profiles. From what I have noticed, you work very well together, but I think it would be interesting for colleagues online to understand a bit better how you share the roles and the responsibilities.
Thank you. So I get asked this question all the time, both inside OCHA and outside OCHA. And I spoke to Mireya, you know me very well. I spoke initially as a mother, as a wife as well. And I mean, not that Martin and I are in that space, but I was telling one of my colleagues, how do you define the role of a mother and a father in a family? And she said to me, she's a national staff, that it's a true partnership. That's when the kids turn out to be well balanced. So Martin and I basically decided not to have a division of labor between the two of us because we have, as you rightly pointed out, very complementary skill set. I mean, I am a big admirer of Martin, and in the spirit of full disclosure, Samantha, I should have mentioned, my wonderful colleague from ISC has also joined. I didn't know Martin. I mean, I was interviewed and then I landed in New York and I had to learn to work with him. But we have complementary skill set. I think it's very important to remember OCHA as an organization. We have about 2,300 personnel or so, and one ASG. If you look at most UN organizations, you have more than one ASG. What Martin and I have found extremely useful is when he's engaging, whether it's on Libya, Morocco, Gaza, I'm in the room with him unless there is a huge conflict, because when he's not there, I can step in. Like now I'm in New York, he's in Europe. Yesterday, SG wanted information on Gaza, and I was summoned to go and brief the leader of the UN. So that complementarity, because I'm there all the time with Martin, allows me, when he's not there, to represent the organization as one team. I think the second is, because we have complementary skills, what I have found is there is a bit of natural sort of comparative advantage engagement. For example, I lived in Asia, in China and South Korea for almost 7 years when I was working for the World Bank. So because of that, when I go to Korea to mobilize resources for humanitarian, I tap into my old networks because I was there. And he has certain comparative advantages, for example, in Middle East and North Africa. So again, on resource mobilization, financing, we are complementing. On engagement with development partners, because of the stress the humanitarian system is facing, because I spent 20 years at the World Bank Group, sometimes I inform him what to say and who to see, and then I come in and join meetings with him with the World Bank because I know how it operates from the kitchen. So that's how we work, and so far it's working very well. And then internally we chair all the meetings because he travels a lot, as you have seen. I tend to be, like now I'm in New York. There are budget meetings, there are certain plumbing things that need to move. So naturally, I'm pushing those while he's away. But he knows what I'm doing, and for the most part, he endorses, and we have deep confidence amongst each other. And when I speak Martin and I, it's really Martin and I. It's not that he gave me a script to say, because I understand how he thinks. Over.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I can continue with questions to you, but that's not the idea of this meeting. And I hope that this meeting will not be an isolated one. I'm sure members would be keen after this discussion to continue the engagement with you. And I think from the discussion we had now, just to kick off this meeting, I heard some important elements mentioned by you. You spoke about challenges, you spoke about challenges on access, you spoke about protection, accountability to affected people, you spoke about partnership and trust and being complementary to each other. So I think with these elements, I would like to open the floor and ask all the colleagues, encourage them to really use this opportunity to ask questions to you that do not necessarily focus too much at the specific country context, because otherwise we'll need specific meetings dedicated to only one country to go a bit more in depth. But questions that look also at the strategy of OCHA, at some of the challenges you mentioned, of course, success, but also the funding situation and the challenges around that. So, of course, links with specific country situations would be welcomed. And I would also understand that some colleagues are working at the country level. We have also a number of national leaders that have joined this call today. So, of course, I would also accept that some of the questions would go very much at the country level, but it shouldn't be all about country-specific situations. So with this, I would open the floor. I suggest that I take every time 3 to 4 questions to you, Joyce. We have 1 hour left, so this would allow us to have a few rounds of questions. And after 3 or 4 questions, I will hand it over to you for some quick answers. And of course, we understand that you might not have the answers to all the questions. So in this case, would really also appreciate if you could follow up then with us, and the ICVA would be glad to share that information with colleagues. So I have here in my list first Miro, then Bettina, and then Cecilia. And I would invite colleagues when taking the floor also quickly introducing themselves and the organization they represent. Thank you. So the floor is yours, Mira.
Thank you very much, Mirella. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miro Modushan. I am Geneva representative for Intersos, Italian NGO. So thank you very much, Joyce, and actually good morning to you. Thank you for this opportunity for engagement. I'm really delighted to hear that you value partnership with NGOs and that you truly appreciate the skills, capacities, and knowledge that the NGOs are bringing to the humanitarian sector. I also want to say that we highly value the member states briefings organized by OCHA, both in Geneva and New York, as well as, of course, other conferences and events where OCHA is involved in organization. And there we really feel that the perspectives of international and national NGOs are truly important, and I mean that on as panelists to be actually standing on a panel and provide the perspectives from both like the field, the deep field operational experience, as well as perspectives of the communities. But we sometimes see that there are inconsistencies there, and that we don't see the automatic, let's say, inclusion of NGOs on the panel. So it's really not a question, but more a call to you to perhaps support this request that all the briefings and events that obviously require the voice of NGOs would include us on a panel as a regular thing. I hope that's welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miro. I have Bettina next, but just maybe to also share with you that we are recording this meeting, if that is okay with everyone. And because not everyone could attend today, but we are still interested, the members, to receive a recording of a meeting. If it's okay for you, share it within the membership, and also make it available online, if that's okay for everyone. So Bettina, you are next. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mirella. Joyce, very nice to meet you. My name is Bettina Iseli. I'm the Director Programs of WHH. That's a German NGO working on zero hunger. It was very nice to hear from you, your priorities, also talking about the funding, which I think is something that is on the top of our minds, about also effectiveness of the humanitarian system. So we've been working a lot and piloting anticipatory humanitarian action, because we think that this is also one way to address exactly these issues that you mentioned. So I would be very interested in how you place anticipatory humanitarian action in your world, in your priorities? Is that something that's also on top of your head, like mine, or where would you place that? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina. Cecilia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Cecilia Roselli, and I'm the director of the Norwegian Refugee Council here in Geneva. And thank you also for your very interesting remarks at the beginning of this call. Your priorities obviously resonate very well with ours, and we are very keen to continue the collaboration with OCHA going forward. As Miro said, thank you for the acknowledgement of the role of partners. Which is not always a given. So it's really appreciated that you have started with these words, your conversation with us. I have a couple of comments that I would like to make, in particular in relation to your priority related to advocacy and access. As you know, NRC is co-chairing the IASC task force on preserving humanitarian space. We are also supporting the IASC Secretariat in the current pilot on humanitarian diplomacy or collective advocacy, how you want to call it. I would like to ask you, and we are very active as well at country level in the different access working groups, etc. And we experience somehow, and in some places more than in others, some challenges in terms of leadership at humanitarian country teams level, in particular on access. This is particularly challenging in complex operational environments, and I'm very glad to hear that there is a particular attention now on access in Palestine, because this is a situation that is very concerning for us. And it's important that we increase leadership at country level on these issues. And I would like to hear your take on this. What can we do to support this leadership and make sure that the leadership that is working well in countries stays and is also rewarded? I've just heard about the news from Niger. It's very worrying and concerning. So what can we do also as NGOs to support you with that and make sure that we work together, because we really need access, and we really need access now in places like Rafah. And then I have a separate but also connected question, because we are, as you know, hosting the review, the IASC independent review on internal displacement. And we are about to receive the first preliminary thinking from the review team that will be presented to the deputies by the end of the month. How do you think we can promote the uptake when this comes out? How can we make sure that there is a prompt action and full buy-in from the different agencies on what will emerge as findings, but also as suggested solutions for way forward? Because we have already experienced with the protection policy review that it takes long time before we can action recommendations. So any advice from you on that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Mireia, can I take 3 and then we do 3, if you don't mind?
I think that would be the best.
Okay.
So the floor is yours.
You are my boss here, so I follow.
We are all equal here.
No,
and
but Mireia has been, I'm going to embarrass you, but Mireia has been more than a colleague. I mean, she's just a gift to the system, and I really enjoy meeting her, but also even when we agree to disagree, you come with constructive and practical solutions. You don't just whine. So I want to really commend you for that. You don't see that a whole lot in leadership, and I really want to pass my deepest thanks. Miro, thank you. I really take your feedback wholeheartedly. I do think NGOs should be there in member states briefing. I thought they were, so I appreciate you sharing this. I'm asking Samantha and Justin, my assistant, to please remind me so I can send an email to my colleagues when we do briefings to have the NGOs in the panel. So please consider that done. I will do that before I go to bed tonight. Bettina, thank you very much. And just like you, anticipatory action is actually in my head. The question is which part of my head, because currently there's a lot. But I should have mentioned anticipatory action, just like gender. Frankly, they are part of the DNA of everything we do. But let me narrow down on anticipatory action. I was especially coming from UNEP and having worked on climate and having looked at different pragmatic tools for early warning when I was in UNEP, mostly from data. When I came to OCHA, I was absolutely attracted by the anticipatory approach work that Dirk-Jan and others have done. And my first couple of months, actually, I spent a lot of time understanding about the tool. And I was pleased to observe and learn about the 12 countries pilot. Now, as you know, Bettina, I was trained as a scientist. Pilots are great, but at some point you have to stop. You have to evaluate what has worked, what has not worked to bring them to scale. So we initiated that work, which I know you know, a very light review of the pilot, because pilots cannot be timeless. They have usually an end, and they usually, good pilots, you also have midterm M&E framework to see and adjust. And when you do pilots in 12 countries, the context, and I've seen this in Bangladesh, in Somalia, very different. So thanks to our evaluation team lead, Kelly, there was a light review and a decision was made by senior leadership group to mainstream the work into whole of OCHA. And that process is currently underway. And why? Because we wanted to get to scale, learn from the two pilots, and boom, go to scale. The other aspect of mainstreaming for impact is also, especially under the discussions of climate change, we really felt that the early warning planning was missing at the country level. But we were also hearing from countries, including governments and partners, that the framework was very complicated. I'm going actually to South Africa, Botswana, 5 countries starting Friday. They are interested in anticipatory approach. So I'm actually taking one of Dirk-Jan's colleagues to go and talk about natural disasters and how Mozambique, for example, and Malawi can look at cyclones very differently as part of the planning and how they can finance. But how we communicate, it goes back to humility. I heard from some of the countries, they were saying, we were going and lecturing them and the partners, you should be doing this, and they did not appreciate that. So we've also had to work internally on our language, on linking the tool to what is relevant for a particular country. If we go to some of these countries and say, this worked in Bangladesh, you should be doing that, they don't like should. So we are going to scale, we are going to be deliberate, and we are going to position it in COP28. I think what Bettina, I think an untapped potential for anticipatory action, because at the end of the day, we have to get to the key policymakers when it comes to planning, is really thinking about the cost of not using the early warning tool vis-a-vis the cost of using, because then you will get partners on the ground to pause and say, wait a minute, let me look at the anticipatory approaches. I think the other thing that we could do more of, and I've challenged the team in OCHA, is to highlight and shine light on examples that have worked. And instead of us speaking, finding the champions, the beneficiaries, or the users to actually speak, to say, this is what happened when I did early warning, when I used anticipatory approaches. That is very powerful. And then lastly, I will stop, is to be humble and honest to say, this has worked here, but it may not work here. So how do we customize? Because we cannot go with one size fit all. And that, by the way, is the feedback that we received from OCHA staff, who felt that we, at least in the past, it was being pushed wholeheartedly without taking the nuances. But it's in my head, it's on top of my head, and I'm a big fan of it. I can assure you. Cecilia, thank you very much on your work on access. And thank you also, I know NRC, I have some friends there. You've also given us feedback, OCHA, what we can do better. Based on your feedback, as you know, Martin, actually now we have an access team in the coordination division, and we've tried to connect the dots, because when Martin came and myself, the team was a bit fragmented. People who are working on policy, on others, on negotiations, they were. So now we have a whole team approach with a strategy which was overseen by Edem, who told me she worked very closely with your team. I take note of the point about the leadership challenge in access. Frankly, I share your concern. It's very unfortunate what happened in Niger. I was on the call with Louise yesterday, the humanitarian coordinator. I think my take is the following. One is, you asked, I think, what can we do more? I think one is developing the skill set for access, the humanitarian advocacy and diplomacy. Martin is very big on that. It really is about listening, humility. You know, in some of the access, I'm sure you know better than I do, people don't like broadcasting things on social media, but our natural instinct sometimes is to go and publicize. So how do you play a low key to move the access needle, very quietly? The second is working across the system, across sectors. For example, I gave the example of the Rafah crossing negotiations, but that meant Martin, myself, had to work with UNRWA, in OPT, had to work with the DPPA, because the SRSGs from DPPA with one approach had to work with LIN as RCHC. So bringing everyone who is involved and coming together is very important. What we have also done in OCHA, for example, in the case of Gaza, since Secretary General is making phone calls to different leaders, is to insert a bullet point on access in his talking points so he can communicate to leaders on behalf of humanitarians. I think, if I could be honest, with all that is happening, the PNGs and everything, I see a bit of risk aversion. And frankly, some of our good people, they don't want to work on access because they also think about their careers. So part of what Martin and I were saying, we have to support them through good and bad times. That's what leaders do. But sometimes we fail, because otherwise I've seen jobs of humanitarian coordinators where people don't apply. And when you go and ask some of the potential candidates, they said, well, I don't want to be PNG'd to look bad on my CV. It's a stain on my reputation. So how do we embrace colleagues who, not because of their doing, I know in the case of Niger, they became victims of bigger things, yeah? I think for me, what worries me, if I could be honest, Cecilia, is the wind of access challenges we are seeing in West Africa and the Sahel, and whether that will continue, you know, the anti-UN, the with de facto authorities, the anti-humanitarians, misinformation, you know, which we have no control. We are trying, but it's very difficult. So that's what keeps me awake. But I think if we can work together on developing skill set, on supporting our leaders through the good and the bad times, on working across sectors, but also on a bigger nut to crack, the disinformation, I think that would be helpful. You saw the challenges in Yemen, for example, with WFP and others. On IDP review, what is the advice? Frankly, I'm chairing the meeting of the deputies group. I'm not privy to the recommendations and findings, so it's kind of hard for me to advise before seeing the recommendations. But I'll be happy to come back to you once we've had. I think Louis is very strong. I'm looking forward to the discussion with the deputies and the presentation. Just learning from the protection review without obviously having the specifics of the IDP review. How do we take the findings? First, my response would be, let's see what the findings are, what would require. I think two would be, and this is where your value is absolutely central, let us be pragmatic. Let us be pragmatic on the findings and what can be done, and who else do we need to bring on board to help us do it, especially in a resource-constrained environment. And then two, I would say, again, I have not seen the findings, sequencing, identifying. I'm very pragmatic to say these are the low-hanging fruits, findings that can be implemented within X months. These are very tough, but we should not give up on them. And let's continue and focus on that discipline. Over to you, Mireya.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Unfortunately, now you are back. The video was frozen, but we could hear you well. But we could hear you perfectly well. And
sorry about that.
No, it was good. We could hear you, and you elaborated on all the questions. Of course, I mean, I'm sure that colleagues would like to come up with more questions on some of the elements you shared. I have already two colleagues, Faith and Gareth. So Faith, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miraj. Good morning. I'm in New York, so good morning, Joyce, and nice to meet you. My name is Faith Nemenen, and I am the Senior Humanitarian Affairs Advisor at Child Fund Alliance. So I'm based in New York. And we do work with OCHA, even in New York, in Geneva, and in some other country offices. Thank you for taking the time to come and have a conversation with us, and for all the updates you've provided. And thanks also to my colleagues before me who've spoken on some of the issues that we also are concerned about. I would like to just hear from you on the issue around the accountability to affected population, especially based on what you said in your statement that when everybody leaves, it's the local NGOs that are on the ground. And we see that right now, even in our office that we have in Gaza. So what do you think we can really do to ensure that these principles, especially around accountability to affected population, and I would also put in focus on children that are impacted by these crises, because we are a Child Fund Alliance, we are a child focused agency. How do we bring these principles and the whole idea of local NGOs and that whole thing together and to improve on it? Because we've talked about this a lot. There's been a lot of conversation around localization. There's been a lot around the accountability to affected population, but over and over, we are challenged when we are faced with these multiple crises. How do we to ensure these principles? And in the end, it is the local NGOs or the local population that is on the ground. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And thanks to Miraj as well. We are also a member of IFCA. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. I suggest taking the questions from Gareth as well, and one more from Jolianne. Gareth, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Miranda and Joyce. Much appreciated for taking the time out. So I'm Gareth. I head up the Syria INGO Regional Forum for the Syria crisis. Really interesting discussion. I wanted to kind of maybe touch on, I think as we all know, it's a very, very resource constrained environment right now, and we're all dealing with far more crises than I think we've had to deal in the past few years, to a point where arguably the kind of system itself is sort of at its limits. At the same time, obviously, we've got a huge amount of effort going into kind of thinking around the nexus, onto supporting protracted displacement and populations who have been displaced for years, if not decades at this point. So I was wondering if you could touch on sort of what your thoughts are, and maybe Martin's thoughts around sort of OCHA's direction, and how you're sort of thinking around managing what is a kind of inherent tension between that sort of need to be able to do acute emergency response at the same time as kind of supporting long-term protracted displacement. Eva.
Thank you very much. Very good question as well. Julian, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Jali from World Vision. I am currently the Humanitarian Emergency Affairs Specialist. Actually, I am very pleased when you mentioned about the anticipatory action, that it should be on the actually in the DNA when we implement humanitarian action. Second, I was thrilled when Marilla mentioned that you're actually from UNEP before. I am just curious about your thoughts on green response. That's my.
You're putting me on the spot. Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are
So
not.
you want my views? Sorry, Jolly. My views on green
response.
Green response.
Yeah.
You are not having an easy time with us, Joyce. You are getting too many questions on all relevant subjects, but those are not easy subjects. So I have here a question for you on accountability to affected people, on the funding situation, and the view of OCHA's position on acute emergency response versus more protected response, and then the green response of OCHA. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. You know, if I did not get tough questions, then I would be very disappointed, and I would be very worried actually that maybe Mireya have done something wrong. So I like tough questions, because tough questions bring the best and also challenges biases and assumptions. You know, so engaging actually with this diverse group of NGOs, you bring that discipline for me to also think differently or challenge my own biases or OCHA's biases. So thank you. Faye, good to see you. On AAP and localization, and what do you think, or what do I think we can do more? Because there's been a lot of talk and what have you. I mean, for me, in my year and a half here and having traveled, I remember being invited to, in the middle of nowhere in the desert in Yemen, northern part in Houthi land, by an IDP woman who had moved more than 7 times, and she cleaned her really small hut and made it clean, put flowers to welcome me, and we sat on the floor and she made tea for me. And I thought for myself, this woman has nothing, has gone through a lot, a mother of 5 or 6 children, and yet she was very giving. And I asked her, and I didn't package it as accountability to affected people, but I asked her, what are her wishes for her children? I'm a mother of 2. She's a mother of 7. Around, I think she's younger than me. And she said to me, education, safety, the same values and wishes I have for my own 2 children. Yeah. So I think for me, and maybe because I'm an outsider, what I find extremely rewarding is unpacking very complex themes that we talk in our chambers. For example, accountability to affected people, to human stories, like what I've shared, because there is power in human stories. And when I told this story in a lecture in a northern country, people paused. You could hear a pin drop, because it was about people. Then I linked it to this is what we are trying to do. So what can we do? I think one is really reflecting on, are we communicating effectively? Some of the localization, I had to have, and I'm pretty well versed, maybe 5 briefings to actually get it. What does localization mean when I came to OCHA and challenged some colleagues? So you can imagine a taxi driver or an IDP or a local NGO in the middle of nowhere, whether they will get it, whether development partners will get it. So I think communication is very, very key. Telling human stories and what we are trying to accomplish is extremely important. I think on localization, I'm just coming from another meeting with our funds manager, country-based pool funds managers. And I was asked the question on localization. I told them I'm coming to speak to you. And their question was, how do we build and develop the capacity of national NGOs to be able to absorb? Because that was one of the basic criteria to be a beneficiary. Because sometimes if we are not explaining, these are the criteria you need to meet, then we are building mistrust between our national partners. And we discussed this, Mireya, in the deputies group, together with communities, but also amongst ourselves. So I would say unpacking, speaking, using human language, and shining stories of what works. And I find it very challenging sometimes when I speak to people who are not from humanitarian sectors, like, and this goes to Gas' point, I think, on resources. When we talk to MDBs, they don't understand what is localization. So also our peers, when we try to do Nexus, don't understand. So communication, but I would welcome you, Faye and others, to give us ideas. What do you think we can do? What do you think the ISC, again, tapping into your knowledge and closeness to communities? One of the discussions we had at the deputies group, I'm sure Mireya shared with you, how are we going to manage expectations when we go with accountability to affected population and people say they want schools, they want development of basic services in a setting where we have constrained resources? How are we going to balance what they expect from us as communities and what we can realistically provide without losing trust between us? And that's a big question. I would welcome a further discussion on that. Gath, how are we managing tension? It's a day-by-day job. I'll be very honest with you. One thing you should know about me is honesty. In some places it's easy, in some places it's not. Let me give you a specific example. Most of the development partners, particularly the ones with the deep pockets, they tend to work, or their envelopes are country by country. So for example, in South Sudan, it's been very easy to convince the World Bank to come in and IFC, private sector, to take the load a bit on basic services so humanitarian financing could be prioritized. In other places, Myanmar, Afghanistan, Syria, it's much more complex because they're not operating there. They're not allowed to operating. I think the question for us is, how do we become a bridge and work with them to support? And there is a bit of appetite under the current, for example, president of the World Bank, Martin, and I had a meeting with the number 2 of the World Bank during UNGA. So we are exploring specific context that are relatively easy because we do need demonstration effect. I think the other tension, to be honest, Gath, is humanitarian response plans are very short term. Most development plans are medium long term, 3-5 years. If you look at our HRPs, they're 1 year. Do things change from 1 year to another? Marginally, if any. So how do we reconcile the pace and the time in terms of planning? That's something I think is another tension. And then the other tension, frankly, we don't understand each other. For example, when I went to Syria and I saw some beautiful early recovery projects, resilience, some of our partners were saying, oh, we should not engage in that. That is for development. But a lot of it had to do with environment, like solar panels of returnees in homes, etc. But in the World Bank language, they don't use those words, even though we are talking about the same thing. So understanding each other, And Mireya, one of the things we have done in OCHA, we have hired a multilateral development specialist person in Lisa's shop, Maham. She's brilliant. So if she can come and have a discussion with your network at some point on Nexus and the kinds of work we are trying to do, or Lisa, I would very much welcome. On resource constraints, we are going full force. I'm going to South Africa, Botswana, trying even to get middle-income countries to contribute. I think we need to diversify our donor base. I was in Korea, trying again, shake all the ATM trees. GCC, Martin and I have been investing a lot of time there. We're looking at private sector, not easy, but we are exploring. We're looking at climate financing, again, to release some of the pressure on natural disasters induced humanitarian crisis, and of course, development partners, as I've mentioned. So there's a lot going on, but your 2024 onwards will be tough. I worry with the Gaza crisis, what the implications would be already in a super stretched. I think internally, and I know some of you have been engaged under Gemma's leadership in Geneva, we have this boundary setting exercise working with HCs to see how can we really try to turn all the stones and be efficient with our priorities and resources. Jolie, anticipatory action, thank you for the comment. You know, the discussion on the green response can take a day. So maybe you and I should meet. Where are you based?
Actually, I'm based in the Philippines.
Oh, I like Philippines. Martin is coming there soon. But I think coming from UNEP, let me be very brief and then, but I'm happy to have a further discussion. There is a lot of potential, but the proof is in the pudding. How do we translate the ideas into action? And to be honest, Jolie, I think this is where your network can add mass value. One thing I've learned coming from UNEP to OCHA is how pragmatic OCHA is. Because of its mandate, we have to move very fast, yeah? So UNEP is brilliant at taking very long-term thinking and using science to help inform. Where you can help, whether it's UNEP, whether it's OCHA, is actually translating, for example, the green responses into real actions around communities. What does this mean for the affected people? What does it mean for populations? And then thinking about the transition, because where we get a lot of pushback, particularly from Global South, is the cost of transitioning to the green response. Who will pay for it, for example? Yeah, so I'm happy if we can have another session on this before COP28. And because now we have, you know, a whole day dedicated to humanitarians, thanks to the teams that have worked to secure the pavilion. Let us do it. If you think we can invite you to come and talk to OCHA humanitarian coordinators or whoever, let's do it. I'm all for it. Yeah. And if you think we should invite people from UNEP, I still have very good friends. Let's do it. Over.
Thank you very much, Joyce. I would be glad to follow up with you on this and also to transmit the interest of a member. Yeah. ICVA has also been doing quite some work in terms of greening the sector and the response also with climate chart and also like together within the ERC. And we are glad to continue following on these initiatives because they are really very important, and also see how within upcoming COP we also go together with some joint message as a sector. And this is again something that we discussed also at the deputies, how to avoid that each of us goes into big event with their own agency message and we get lost in the variety of and diversity of messages that are shared in this program.
Yeah, Mireya, just I think absolutely one advice I would say I have thinking of what Jolie's question is also in bringing the sector thinking about what are the low-hanging fruits that can easily be done with marginal cost. I mean, I always think about some of the things my grandmother in my village in Tanzania, in Kilimanjaro, was doing, was really greening. But I didn't know. Now that I've moved around, looking back, some of the traditional practices that my ethnic group was doing was really green. So capitalizing on that, shining light, and think about how do we bring them to scale. And then identifying things that are more difficult to do, where we probably need to do more heavy lifting. And that's why you can ask me, you can ask Martin, you can ask the ISC to take on those more difficult things. So unpacking what is easy, what is not so easy, and what is long-term will be good.
Definitely. Thank you, Joyce. And you have also a number of comments in the chat box, members appreciating some of your answers, and then also some comments regarding the Nexus approach. I mean, every time we speak about Nexus, actually, my personal experience is that the ones that come with the best answers on this subject are the national and local NGOs. Because they are per definition, per structure and inherent very much into a Nexus way of functioning. And one of them is also showing some of the work that they are doing in specific on Nexus in Yemen. Now I see that we have one more colleague that would like to take the floor. So if it's okay with you.
Absolutely.
I suggest we do a last round with Jamil from Tandin going first, and then I can see still if there are a few more colleagues, two more colleagues that will take the floor, and then I will hand it over to you for the answers and also maybe some wrap up and conclusion from your side. I would also be happy to have a very small conclusive words from ICVA side, and then I think it will be time to close, unfortunately. But the floor now is to Jamil.
Thank you very much, Mirla, and thank you very much, Joy, for giving your time to respond to our questions. I really appreciate your answers to the previous questions, especially when you give specific examples from the field or from the countries you're visiting. Just despite, I know that you're visiting Yemen and you saw the challenges that we face in Yemen regarding access, regarding humanitarian response, lack of funding. My question is, what strategies does OCHA have in place to ensure the sustainability of aid operation in Yemen, considering the current funding challenges? Also, noticing that you coming from development background and you spent more than 20 years in the World Bank, how we can bridge the humanitarian response to the development in Yemen, and what role OCHA can play to do this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, you're muted, Mira, you're muted.
Yeah, there's always a moment when you forget that you have to manage the microphone. Before I give the floor to you to answer this specific question from Jamil, let me check a bit if there would be one or two more colleagues that would like to ask some questions. I don't think that is the case. So Joyce, you have the floor and the question that Jamil asked.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jamil. Are you based in Yemen?
Yes, I'm based in Yemen.
Ah, okay. I have fond memories of Yemen. You know, I spent 9 days and it was a transformational trip for me, and the warmth of Yemen people, not to mention the food, but also the resilience of communities and people I met was incredible. Now, on your question, Jamil, too, one on sustainability funding, I wish I had a super magic response to this, to be frank. If you look globally, believe it or not, the Yemen response plan is one of the better funded. I was in a meeting yesterday on DRC, and even despite the scale up, HRP is still funded at 36%. So I think Ukraine is also, used to be well funded, but it was a one-off allocation. What we are also hearing from our donors is that 2024, already some have already told us there will be cuts. So that's why we are doing everything possible to, and I think if we can work together, honestly, sharing stories of what is working, the impact you're having with communities at a higher level, that would really empower us in our conversation. As we speak, actually, Martin is in Oslo, donors consultations to try and manage the relationship with the Nordic governments to have their continued support. But I wish I had a better answer on sustainability. And then all this was happening even before the Gaza crisis, which I think will also have huge impact. And God knows what else is coming. So I'm afraid I don't have a magic, but what you can count on me and Martin is absolute push. I mentioned that I'm traveling to 5 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. Frankly, we're also trying to bring middle-income countries, high middle-income countries to contribute something. What we're also hearing from donors and potential funders, we need to customize our messages. So for example, when I went to Korea, they operate very different from European and American. So how do we actually help them understand what we are working on and bring them on board and build trust? That's something that I'm helping Martin to do. On your question about how can planning of humanitarian and development be implemented, actually Yemen, interestingly, is cited as one example, including by the bank, where the World Bank has worked well. They even wrote a case study with humanitarians. I know it's not all peachy, easy, it wasn't, but that's one of the success. I think 3 ways I would like to put forward, and I've spoken to some of them before, how we can strengthen our planning. One, we need to understand each other. There are certain, for example, the World Bank is not allowed to give money to write a check to NGOs. They very exceptionally, they would use NGOs as implementing agency, but very rarely they would be allowed. So we need to understand what they can do and cannot do. They also need to understand how we work, particularly with communities, etc. I think number 2 is finding context and countries. Yemen could be one where, say, Yemen is a bit challenging, but where the bank could work and then think about long-term planning. We were actually planning to do, the bank and OCHA planned to discuss specific activities under the World Bank plan in Niger. I was there last year, I think it was, and I had a meeting with Louise, and sadly she's leaving now, the World Bank, and the World Bank was preparing their country partnership strategy, and they agreed to put a component to support resilience infrastructures around IDP camps in one province. So identifying specific areas on planning, that would be good. And then 3 is results. Development likes results, outcome, impact. How do we, in humanitarian sector, this is relatively new. How do you measure impact? So that's it. And there is a fire drill here, but I'm told I can stay for a while. So those are the initial thoughts, but let me stop here, Mireya.
Joyce, please, security comes first, of course. So if you would have to leave, we would understand, of course.
Yeah, you can hear the siren. I think we're being asked to leave. But let me conclude by really. Oh, I can't hear you, Mireya. Please go ahead.
No, please conclude the meeting, because we don't want to keep you while there is a fire alarm in the building. So please, and you have the floor.
Okay. 3 points. Mireya, I'm deeply appreciative to you and to your members, and especially to you for coming up with this idea of me engaging with your members. I have incredibly enjoyed it. Please count me in if I could be helpful. I've learned a lot, and I would like this to continue. And I also am appreciative you asked me a year and a half after I joined, because now I have more reflection. Number 2, we value your voices. We value your experiences. I'm speaking on behalf of Martin. I'm speaking on behalf of the deputies. Please bring your experiences, perspectives, both to ISC mechanism, but also to me as OCHA. Please be our guiding angels. You see the communities, you see us. Tell us where you think we can improve together and how we can improve. I think as part of that, you can also advise us where you think we should do less of, because that also gives a lot of confidence to our donors to say, I've engaged with NGOs. This is what I've heard that they would like us to see, do more of this, less of that. And, you know, it's important. So give us feedback. I think lastly, I travel a lot, and I usually try and tell Mireya, if you know I'm going somewhere, if I could be helpful to you, to your members, to your staff, use me. I also work for you. My title has ASG and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. And as part of that, I also work for you. So put me to work. Mireya knows I'm going to 5 countries. She has kindly connected me to her network in Nairobi, and I think we will have a session. But use me and Martin in our visit to help your work. Thank you. Now over to you, Mireya.
Thank you very much, Joyce. It has been 1 hour and a half, but I hope members during this period had the chance to get to know you better. For sure, we all heard your commitment to work closely with NGOs, to service of NGO work on the ground. And we covered a large number of topics without all the time going too much in depth, but that's also good because we need to follow up on this discussion, Joyce. So I do commit to organize some other moments where you can exchange again with ICVA members, and also see if we do it also jointly with Interaction and the SCHR Alliance. And then maybe next time we focus on one specific topic, and then can go a bit more in depth on that, and also not necessarily use 1 hour and a half, but do it also 1 hour time. But thank you so much, an excellent meeting. And I still don't know how you managed to cover all the different subjects that colleagues brought up, but you did an amazing job. We were delighted to have you with us, and I think we even have some concrete follow-up points from ICVA side and also from your side. So I will stay in touch. Thanks a lot, and greetings to you all in New York.
Thank you. And thank you, Mireya. And while I was doing, because I have a wonderful team, Samantha and Justin, we've already passed on a message about having NGOs in the panels. And it's already the Geneva, the head of our Geneva office has promised me that he's looking into this. And I'm tasking Samantha to come back to say when it will happen. So that is done within 1.5 hours. Thank you, Samantha.
When Joyce says it's done, it's really done.
Thank you.
I need to finish a meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.